Control. This is the main reason why I do not like the 401k plan. Now, this video is not financial advice, purely for entertainment. If you have any financial advice questions, seek a financial advisor. Now, let's talk about this. I'm going to tell you why I personally do not like the 401k. And the main reason comes down to control. But there are a couple of things that I also have taken into consideration when it comes to my long-term retirement plan and idea for retirement. Obviously, not many of us can afford a financial advisor or CFP, so many of us are just kind of shooting from the hip. And from a lot of the analysis that I've done, this is essentially what I thought at this moment is best for myself and my family moving down the line, because they're also a part of this. And this is going to be very, very not risk on at all. So let me tell you exactly why I do not like the 401k. And it comes down to the limits that they place on the amount of contributions that you can put in. Roughly just under $20,000 a year, you're able to contribute into your 401k plan. Now, if you're as aggressive as I am when it comes to putting money into your retirement because you want to take advantage of quick compound growth, then this just does not satisfy that. Now, for those of you who are familiar with money and finances and how it works, you're probably familiar with the time value of money. And one of the tenets and pillars in it is that larger cash flows and money today is worth more than smaller cash flows and money tomorrow. So unfortunately, I used to back in the day put down only like 1% of my paycheck when I first started working, which is hardly anything, and put that into my 401k. And that's all I would do. Or I would put it up to the match point, which might be like 3% or 4%, and then get matched, which is fine. That's free money. However, when you realize that, oh, wait, I want to get this goal in retirement, and if I can only put in just under $20,000 a year, that's not gonna cut it. So I need to find another way to work this. Now, there are other vehicles such as the Roth IRA. There's a limit there annually of around $6,000. So for myself, I said, that's not going to cut it again. So what do I do? So as far as contributions are concerned, I decided to open a brokerage account, which is going to lead me to point number 3, or point number 2 in this. And I will say, well, let me start off with this article. Basically, there's a point in here that says your 401k return depends on different factors like your contributions, investment selection, and fees. So those are 3 variables. We just talked about the first one, which are contributions, and the limitations that we have on our contributions for the 401k and even the Roth IRA. So I said, in order to circumvent this, I opened a brokerage account. Okay. There's no limit there. You can put as much money as you want into a brokerage account. Now, for me, that solves problem number 1 for contributions. Problem number 2 is investment selection. Now, like many of you, I have gone down the path of like trying to trade, and it took up way too much time. Yeah, I was able to get some wins, but I also got some losses. And honestly, it really just did not even out. It even pretty much evened out from where I began. I didn't really get anywhere, and I just wasted a lot of time. And when it comes to my retirement, I want something that's not as risky as just getting in and out of small positions. So as far as selection for my retirement account, I decided to do what the Oracle of Omaha has suggested, which is, let me just move this over here. For most people, the best thing is to own this kind of index fund, which for Warren Buffett, he says an S&P 500 index fund is the best thing for most people who want to invest. And I will say for the long term. Now, again, I mentioned that I didn't want to deal with the ups and downs of dealing with, specific choices that I picked within my portfolio because I had to manage that. And I had to figure out what was the best diversification here. And there's just way too much time and way too much effort. However, when you take quarterly data going all the way back to 1928, which is what I did here, you can see going all the way back to about 1928, for the S&P 500, quarterly returns are roughly 1.76% on average. Median's about 2.3. And as far as frequency distribution for quarterly returns for the 401k, you're looking at anywhere between 0 to 4% on average for quarterly return, which is pretty good. Now, as far as average annual return, going back to 1926, it's approximately 10 to 11%. Now, the reason why I mentioned those two things, average annual return, and I also want to talk about, where is it? Standard deviation of 8.14%. The reason why I'm also talking sample variation of 0.01, the reason why I want to take a look at this over the long term is that I want to have very little standard deviation in comparison to my actual return over time. So generally, if you're taking a look at the risk here, we can go back to this graph here. Quarterly, it would be very rare for me to see anything above 16% or below negative 16%. It would be very common for me to see positive returns, large positive returns. Or I should say more consistent positive returns. Now, the reason for that, or the reason why I bring that up, is because if I'm expecting 10 to 11%, I want that to be a 10 to 11% return that's risk adjusted. And when it comes to investments, you want to take a look at your the central return, or the common return that you can expect to get from an investment, and also the risk around it, the dispersion. Now, there are different ways you can take a look at dispersion, different ways you can take a look at central tendency. That's what I meant to say, central tendency. And it's very consistent with the S&P, 10 to 11% central tendency, average annual return. For the dispersion, very consistent, low levels. So over time, I'm putting money into the S&P 500 and very low tail risk and very consistent, getting 10 to 11%. Why is that important? Well, if we go back to that 401k article, it states that you can expect to get 5 to 8% from your 401k. Now, that again comes from those three variables we talked about. Well, I should say two out of those three variables mainly. That's the investment selection, and that's also the next thing I'm going to talk about, the fees. So if you choose something that doesn't give you a consistent return like the S&P 500, or you dilute your contributions among something very consistent like the S&P 500, and let's say something very like risk heavy like something in tech, right? Or just anything, something cyclical as well, you're actually going to reduce your return if the average annual return over that same period of time is less than the S&P 500. So with that increased diversification, you're actually limiting the amount of return that you're getting just due to the amount of volatility that you're taking out by adding more diversification. There is actually a point of diminishing returns with increased diversification. If you have perfect diversification, there's a potential of you just making no money. You could just have the perfect diversification. That means you're gonna literally make no money because of the volatility that you just took out of your portfolio. So you need to seek risk, but you need to seek risk adjusted returns. So that's the investment selection. So I chose personally the S&P 500 index. I chose one of them. I'm not going to say because this isn't investment advice, but that particular one that I chose also has a dividend that it pays out about 1.5%. And the cost of it is only 0.03, also known as the expense ratio. So let's talk about the fees here. So unfortunately, many people, without knowing it, choose funds within their 401k, some with expense ratios of 1%, some around 0.85, very high expense ratios that over time eat at your overall return. I've even seen articles that say if you have about a 1% return over the course of, or 1% expense ratio over the course of decades, you might be losing out on like $300,000 by the end of that. So for myself, the cost was very important. So I chose one with a very low expense ratio. So I basically, again, figured out the contribution problem by getting a brokerage account, chose the benchmark index that many portfolio managers try to play against. And that's something I forgot to mention. Warren Buffett actually bet some hedge fund managers years ago that over time they would underperform the S&P 500, and they did. They lost a bet. The S&P 500 beat those hedge fund managers. Very intelligent people, and still they lost against the benchmark. So over time, again, my thing is I'm going to just put my money on the surefire thing, especially if it's my retirement that I'm thinking about. Now, in addition to that, the fees, choosing an option that has a low cost, that also might even give me some cash flow because of dividends that they pay out. Now, going back to control, because that's the main centerpiece of this video. I do not like the fact that A, yes, there are annual contribution limits, but also B, that there are forced minimum distributions that you have to take once you hit a certain age in old age. Otherwise, you will get hit with a hefty tax if you don't take that minimum amount of cash from your account. So over time, what I'm basically saying is that you're liquidating your account, meaning that you won't be able to pass that thing that you worked on for so many years down to your kids and have them continue the compound growth of your account. So that's the thing that I also had an issue with. So you might say, well, all right, TJ, well, how are you circumventing this? Well, the thing I'm doing is I have an account where I don't have that, that attribute. When I hit any age, I'm not going to be forced to liquidate my account, which is important because there might be some times when I don't need to, sell any shares. But in addition to that, if I'm lucky enough and consistent enough and disciplined enough over time to actually hit that compound interest, and I've actually done some models of this, I could get to a very high level pretty quickly, also due to the amount of contributions I want to put in. And I could do a securities-based loan and just live off of loans against my own debt. And many securities-based loans are cheaper than alternatives such as, living off of credit cards and stuff like that. And you don't have to pay taxes on them. So you also beat the tax issue. So for myself, even if that's not even possible, let's say I don't have a large account at the end of my investing life. I still don't like the idea of being told you have to take X amount out of your account, otherwise you're going to get hit with a tax. That's just a no-go for me. So guys, this is why I don't like 401ks. Let me know why you don't like 401ks as well.